we will continue from where we left off. You remember where we left off? Which pranayama? Great, thank you. So we will go to the Nadi Shodhana pranayama. So just to remind about the structure of the Pranayama chapter, as you can see, we can see the Pranayama chapter of Hatha Pradipika in 6 sections. So this is there for you to see, where the central section is the Ashtakumbhakas. So before that we saw Nadi Shodhana. Before the commencement of any discussion on any pranayama, we see Nadi Shodhana being elaborated. I also presented my view yesterday that this can be one standalone pranayama that itself can help lead to the objective of Hatha Yoga, that is leading the prana into Sushumna. Just a reminder to that. I hope aware of the technique of Nadi Shodhana pranayama also. Left nostril inhale, hold the breath, right nostril exhale. And then right nostril inhale, hold the breath, and left nostril exhale. So this is the standard classical technique that is given. Sometimes, and 2 points to be noted is, sometimes in the initial stages of practice, holding the breath within is not advised. It's not mentioned in the text, in the practice inputs which are there. And very interesting to note, there are no exhale hold in Hatha Yoga Pradipika as such. Be it the Ashtakumbhakas, be it Nadi Shodhana, there is no holding the breath after exhalation. Bahya Kumbhaka is not available in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika in any of the pranayamas that are described. So it is always holding the breath within. So that's why it is called as Kumbhaka. Kumbhaka itself means that is Kumbhavat. That is the abdomen bulges like a pot. So hence, in which situation will it bulge like a pot? Now when we hold it within. So hence Kumbhaka itself is appropriate to be used when the breath is held within. So, and Bahya Kumbhaka seems to be maybe in other texts or later texts, a later kind of addition or some practice. But I have to make this also clear that in Yoga Sutras, there is a hint of Bahya Kumbhaka, where we see in the Sutra, Prachardana Vidharanabhyam va Pranas. Prachardana Vidharana. Exhaling and holding the breath. So there is one mention there, but there are many interpretations to that. There are about 9 techniques of pranayama which emerge from the hint that is given by sage Patanjali. It is not only holding the breath after exhalation, there are so many other processes involved. So one of my papers which have been accepted for publication elaborates about that. So you can see that in my academia account later, once the paper is published, you can see that. So that is the point that I wanted to make. That is, in Hatha Yoga Pradipika, one can have it very clearly, and there is no doubt about it, that there is only inhale and hold. Antah Kumbhaka only is there, and there is no exhale hold. That point is to be noted. And then various other points about this has been mentioned about Nadi Shodhana itself. Success in 3 months is assured with the right kind of practice. Then what is right kind of practice? That is doing Nadi Shodhana for 4 times a day. Pratar Madhyandhine Ratrau Ardharatrecha Kumbhakan. Prataha Madhyandhine Sayam. Sorry. Prataha Madhyandhine Sayam Ardharatrecha Kumbhakan. So 4 periods. Morning, midday, evening, and also in the middle of the night. But the commentator says, if not possible in the middle of the night, then 3 times a day will also be fine. To attain success in 3 months, to cleanse all the nadis in 3 months, the commentator says 4 times a day or at least 3 times a day, and 80 cycles of nadi shodhana per session of practice. So that is again the classical standards that have been given for nadi shodhana to happen. We keep on doing nadi shodhana 10 rounds or 12 rounds, but when will the nadis get cleansed? For a clear answer on that, such is the amount of intensity, effort that is needed to be put to cleanse. So much of impurities have clogged our system. We don't know about because of our unregulated lifestyle. So much of impurity has entered. So that much of effort is needed to flush it out of our system. So that is highlighted by all these things. And of course, diet is also prescribed for nadi shodhana and so on. And interestingly, in the commentary to this portion, you can further read about this. I'm not going to elaborate. Daily schedule for a yogi is mentioned. So how when he gets up, what he should do, then what is the sankalpa that is to be done before the start of yoga practice, and what are all the important asanas that are to be performed, and then how many kumbhakas are to be performed, and how does he close his practice. So a practice template, yoga practice template is given as a commentary to this 10th verse of this nadi shodhana practice, which can be further explored by those who are interested. So, and then various other indications about the practice, especially about pranayama is mentioned. Hikka, shwasascha, kasascha, shiraha, karna, akshi, vedana, all those pain, problem, trouble will come with improper practice. And then yatha simho jo vyagro bhaved vashya shanai shanaihi. So just like the simha, lion, gaja, elephant, vyag, tiger are all tamed by gradual systematic training and practice, patient training and test. Similarly, prana, one should not rush with regulating the prana. So that is the spirit that is mentioned there. And then there is again one more point on verse 18, kind of preparation, preparatory hints on pranayama is mentioned, which again brings out the beautiful contributions that the commentary makes. There is a verse, you might have heard about it. Yuktam yuktam tyajed vayum, yuktam yuktam cha purayet, yuktam yuktam cha badhniyat, evam siddhim avapnuyat. What is the verse? So these are the basic thumb rules or guidelines for inhalation, hold and exhalation. What is that? Yuktam yuktam tyajed vayum. Exhalation has to be done yuktam yuktam. Yuktam yuktam cha purayet. Inhalation has to be done yuktam yuktam. And then yuktam yuktam cha badhniyat. Holding the breath within should also be done yuktam yuktam. What is this yuktam yuktam? Means appropriately. So it is or gradually. That's what this translation, the translation in this book also reads. The general translation reads only that much. So gradually or appropriately exhale, gradually or appropriately inhale, and gradually and appropriately hold the breath. What does it inform us about the practice? What is gradual or what is appropriate? The commentator clarifies in the context of exhalation. What is yuktam yuktam? Exhalation should always be shanaihi shanaihi. So slow exhalation. The pace is what is intended when the yuktam yuktam is mentioned in the context of exhalation. So exhalation should always be slow. Never ever one should rush with exhaling the breath. Whichever pranayama, except those Kapalabhati and Bhastrika, in other pranayamas, exhalation should always be slow. Then yuktam yuktam cha purayet. So inhalation. So what is the important component or the idea to be remembered? So according to one's capacity of the lung. So how much I can fill in. So in inhalation, it is not about the pace. One can even inhale fast, but according to one's capability to receive the breath. So that is the yuktam. In beyond one's capability, one should not try to inhale, which will lead to lots of problems. So that is yuktam in the context of inhaling. And yuktam cha badhni, holding the breath appropriately or gradually. What does that mean? Yuktam there means the correct way of holding the breath is holding the breath with the three bandhas. So Jalandha, Mula Bandha and Udyana Bandha. So inhaling the, holding the breath and performing the three bandhas. That is the right of holding the breath. For pranayama, it is Surya Bhedana, Ujjayi, Shitali, Bhastrika. Even in Bhastrika, there is a final hold component. So in this way, we see that in exhalation, it is pace, slow pace. In inhalation, it is the quantity or the capacity of inhalation. And in holding the breath, it is the practice of bandhas. Just like not merely holding the breath like that, notionally not holding the breath with appropriate performance of the bandhas. That is the right way of holding the breath. So that idea, that very critical insight or input comes from the commentary to the verse 18 of Hatha Yoga Pradipika, chapter 2. Now comes the Shat Karmas. So where we see, all these, it is very widely popular. More than asanas and pranayama, Shat Karma or karmas are given importance because of their kind of therapeutic value that they have, be it Dhauti, Vasti, Neti, Naulika, Trataka and Kapalabhati, etc. So there, the idea that needs to be highlighted is that both the Granthakara, that is in Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and also the commentator clarify that these Shat Karmas are optional. So, Meda Shleshmadikaha Purvam Shat Karmani Samacharet Itarastu Nakuryat Doshanam Samabhavataha. The one who has a flabby kind of prakriti and Shleshma Kapha, only those people are required to practice the Shat Karmas. Itarastu Kuryat. The others are not required to do karmas. Doshanam Samabhavataha. As their doshas are in a very a level of balance, there is no need to do Shat Karmas. And it is further clarified by Hatha Yoga Pradipika. The author himself, Swatmarama himself says, Acharya Pranayamireva Prashushyanti Malayiti Acharyanam tu Keshanchit Anyat Karma na Sammatam. See, there is no need for these Shat Karmas because certain acharyas are of the view that by the practice of pranayama itself, all kinds of malas can be expelled. So, especially in the Krishnamacharya tradition, we see that these Shat Karmas are not practiced. Everything is done through when, okay, Krishnamacharya's period is 20th century, earlier 20th century. When Swatmarama in Hatha Yoga Pradipika 15th century says certain acharyas don't accept this. Who are the acharyas who are mentioned? The older acharyas. So for that, the commentator clarifies Yajnavalkya. Yajnavalkya in his Yajnavalkya Samhita, there he does not mention any karmas to be performed. That is, he has in Yajnavalkya Samhita, which is older to Hatha Yoga Pradipika by a couple of centuries, there we see that 3 chapters are devoted to pranayama. The one on Adishodhana and a couple of more chapters on pranayamas themselves. There in no place we see, though it speaks about Kundalini, etc., cleansing, Nadi Shodhana, all those are mentioned, but the Shat Karmas are not mentioned. So there seems to be 2 schools of thought traditionally itself. It's not that something happened in the 20th century or it's not a 20th century view that Shat Karmas are optional, because what the justification given by Acharya Krishnamacharya in not prescribing Shat Karmas is, there is nothing against Shat Karmas. Of course, they have a lot of therapeutic value, as has been suggested by Swatmarama in Hatha Yoga Pradipika itself. But what happens is, the improper practice of the Shat Karmas, they come with a lot of trouble. So, if anything, any material that we introduce, be it the tube for the neti or other practices, or the cloth that we swallow, and the water that we take in through the anus. So all these, in our current period, Dravya Shuddhi is not there. There are 2 things. One is the dravya, the material that we use. We are not sure how pure it is, how clean it is. So rather than cleansing, it may leave some residual impurity and it may cause trouble. So dravya shuddhi is the main issue that Acharya Krishnamacharya sees in not prescribing Shatkarma in the current era. And number two, whatever material has been introduced from outside has to be expelled, purged completely. If anything remains within the system, which is introduced from outside, then it will create, again, the residual material will create a lot of problem. That's why in Yoga Rahasya we see further reference in this regard, where we see that Sharira Vyadhihanaya Shariram Upayojayet. When there is the trouble in the body, use the body itself. The limbs of the body, faculty of the body, systems of the body itself can help cure the system. Don't consider introducing something externally from outside. So there is a very strong school which says no Shatkarmas. And again, there is a very prevalent school which says that Shatkarmas are very beneficial, and lots of studies, scientific studies are also happening. So just placing both the views before you, and the practitioners can decide. And these two schools of thought are not of recent origin. Some 500, 600 years ago, these two ideas exist with regard to the Shatkarmas. And of course, more than in Hatha Yoga Pradipika, in Gheranda Samhita, a lot of discussion on Shatkarma, a lot of inputs on Shatkarma can be seen. And so that much idea on Shatkarma. There is a lot of the positives, negatives, the problems, or the kind of difficulties that may happen on the Shatkarmas. A lot of analysis. This will be original contribution in yoga related research. See, as I am giving the talk, I am also hinting certain areas where exploration can happen, which can be of help to the yoga practicing fraternity as such. So now coming to the central aspect of the chapter on Ashtakumbhakas, Surya Bhedana Mujjayi, Sitkari Shitali Tatha, Bhasa Brahmari Murcha, Plavini iti Ashtakumbhakaha. These are the 8 kumbhakas that we see, of which Surya Bhedana, Ujjayi, Sitkari, Shitali and Bhastrika. The 5 are connected with the body, or means their benefits, the benefits that come from them are connected to the balancing of Vata, Pitta and Kapha. And especially the last one, Brahmari, is as per the text we see, it can help balance all the 3 doshas, Vata, Pitta, Kapha. So, and then, the Bhastrika. And Brahmari is connected with the mind. It gives a sense. So, first 5 is on the body, the physiology dimension of it. The body aspect is covered by the first 5 pranayamas addressing Vata, Pitta and Kapha. And Brahmari is about the mind. Chitte Jata Kachid Ananda Leela. That's the benefit that is described about Brahmari. It gives by the practice of Brahmari, one feels a sense of bliss in the mind. So that is Brahmari for you. It helps the mind to attain a state of bliss and happiness. Murcha and Plavini are the practices which bestow certain siddhis. So Murcha is as if one can suspend one's consciousness. So Murcha, by the practice of why would we need that? Maybe yogis in the forest, when they are doing their tapas, just like Dhruva, whom we hear in the Purana, Bhagavata Purana. Especially there is a reference in Bhagavata of Dhruva doing pranayama. So such practitioners of in tapovanas, when they practice, when there are wild animals, one can induce a state of suspended awareness, whereby the animals may not harm them and then just go. So there may be various benefits. So for it is not to show off that, oh, I have this capability. Probably it is used or utilized by yogis for certain purpose. And similarly is Plavini. Plavini is one can float on water by inhaling extremely and holding the breath with the Jalandhara Bandha. Again, one can float on water. Probably if the yogi wants to stay aloof and stay somewhere in the middle of the Sangama, then he can do that. or we can see certain yogis. This is about floating on the water, this Plavini. There are references again in the Puranas about sages like Saubhari who went under the water. Submarine tapas they did. They went under the water, did tapas, and the story goes on. So yogis, if they want to choose certain places which are solitary, aloof, they can use these siddhis to go to those places and meditate. Probably this might be in the purpose as to why certain pranayamas with such siddhis are mentioned. This is not to certainly show off ability, because we are all aware in Yoga Sutra itself, Madhav upasargthane siddhayaha. In the progress towards samadhi, all these are obstacles, and yuthane siddhayaha. World outside, it can be considered, yes, I can float on water, I can spend my awareness, etc. So one can show off in that sense. So they are siddhis only from the external world's perspective. Actually, they are obstacles in the path towards samadhi. So that's about Ashta. There is Surya mentioned, and not right. Chandra Bhedana, again, equally important practice, is not found mentioned in this text. In Yoga Yajnavalkya Samhita, a prior text, we find the references, but without the nomenclature. Chandra Bhedana, the nomenclature is not. So, after the discussion on these Ashtakumbhakas, we see the general classification of pranayama being given. Actually, first, what is Puraka, what is Rechaka, and what is Kumbhaka is mentioned. And then it's interesting to note how these three are defined. So Puraka is not mere inhalation. Rechaka is not mere exhalation. I'll just mention the hint that is given in the commentary, which is worth noting by practitioners. And the entire commentary to verse 71 in second chapter is worth noting, because it gives a lot of references on pranayama lakshanam. Pranayama lakshanam gorakshanathena uktam, and the definitions from Yoga Yajnavalkya Samhita, etc. are all given in this commentary portion of verse 71. So I could not locate it in urgency here. Later, maybe in the next session, I will indicate where exactly the pranayama, Pura, Rechaka, and Kumbhaka have been given a specific definition in the text. I will get back in the next session. Okay. So, and then the Sahita and Kevala Kumbhaka varieties of pranayama is mentioned. Sahita Kumbhaka is when the Kumbhaka is achieved with some other component of breathing. So, after inhalation, so with the inhalation, or along with, accompanied by inhalation, or rather followed by inhalation, that hold which happens within, that is called as Sahita Kumbhaka. So, and similarly, there is after exhalation, when the hold happens, holding of the breath outside happens, these are all Sahita Kumbhakas. And Kevala Kumbhaka is a Kumbhaka which just a natural cessation. Kevala means nothing else is associated. In inhale hold, there is inhalation associated prior to the holding. And in exhale hold, there is exhalation associated prior to the hold. Whereas Kevala Kumbhaka is a state which happens by just which is just a suspension of the breath which happens on its own. How will it happen on its own? The acharyas clarify, the commentators clarify that one has to refer to the Yoga Sutra to get the connection here. Dirgha Sukshmaha. Bhakyabhyantara Vishayakshepi Chaturthaha. And then the words Dirgha Sukshma, which is mentioned in the Yoga Sutra, Desha Kala Sankhya Paridrishto Dirgha Sukshmaha. By Desha, by Kala, by the number of cycles that are done with Pranayama, gradually, these Sahita Kumbhakas, when we make these Sahita Kumbhakas Dirgha, longer, and Sukshma, subtler. So, subtler means the sound of inhalation, the sound of exhalation should not be heard. There should be no sound when we inhale or exhale. Maybe in the initial stages, that sound itself can help the mind focus that I am inhaling and I am exhaling. But as one progresses in the practice, the sounds in the process of inhalation and exhalation should be reduced. So when gradually one moves to that stage of Dirgha and Sukshma through the Sahita Kumbhaka, then naturally by the merit of sustained practice, Dirgha Kala Nairantarya Satkara, what happens? The breath, one fine day, we will be able to reach the state of Sankalpa Matrena. I just think that let my breath just stay where it is. Sankalpa Matrena, just by Sankalpa, the breath can be suspended. So that is the state of Kevala Kumbhaka, which is there, which is mentioned there. So that is the goal. Gradually, one has to reach that amount of control over the breath can be achieved. And there are, I think, there are certain texts which even say that the usage of fingers should also be transcended. So we use various mudras to regulate the inflow and the outflow of the breath. So one can even transcend that with practice. It all depends on how much control we exercise over our breath. All that is possible when we So with the application of the mind, we can certainly add these inputs in our pranayama. We may be practicing pranayama over many decades, but we can ask these questions about our own practice. Whether have I reached the state of Dirgha and Sukshma? Whether my pranayama, during the pranayama, am I making any sound, or is it possible to reduce that? And all this again will allow the mind to settle down. Why all these extra? Already the techniques are very complex. Why are you adding much more this thing to the practice? Means all these are the values which can be added again to allow the mind to settle down. So these are all the indications that are given. And finally in the chapter, the last verse, Vapuh Krishatvam, which is very important, indicators of our progress in Hatha so far with asana and pranayama. Vapuh Krishatvam, Vadane Prasannata, Nada Sputatvam, Nayane Sunirmale, Arogata, Bindu Jayaha, Agni Deepanam, Nadi Vishuddhihi, Hatha Siddhi Lakshanam. So how to verify for myself that I am progressing in the path of Hatha? So Vapuh Krishatvam, slimness, Vadane Prasannata, there is brightness in the face, Shobhate Asya Mukham. So the face has brightened, not dull and dim. And then Nada Sputatvam. Nada Sputatvam has two interpretations. The clarity in Nada means the clarity in the voice outside while speaking, and clarity or no stuttering, etc. And internal manifestation of the Anahata Nada. That will also come about by Nada. That is, so twofold interpretations to Nada Sputatvam. Eyes are clear, Nayane Sunirmale, Arogata, not catching cold, not falling ill or repeatedly, so kind of robust health. So Arogata, Bindu Jayaha, control over the carnal or sensual pleasures and desires. And then Arogata, Bindu Jayaha, Agni Deepanam. Agni Deepanam is good metabolic capability, able to digest, assimilate the food that we take in. And then Nadi Vishuddhi, cleansing of the Nadis. So Hatha Siddhi Lakshanam. So these can indicators with which we can monitor our progress in Hatha, especially with the inclusion of pranayama along with asana in our yoga practice thus far. So as this is coming at the end of the second chapter, these are to be associated, to be connected with the practice of asana and pranayama as such. Now we move to the third, which is the central chapter of Hatha Yoga Pradipika, as I mentioned earlier also, because it is, I'm just reminding it once again, because it is this chapter which helps in the movement of or the inputs or the details that are given in this chapter, which helps the facilitation or which facilitates the movement of prana into the sushumna. Hence this is important. Now so what is the structure of this chapter? Just an overview of the chapter. Again, how many divisions are there? There are only 2 divisions. One is about the awakening of Kundalini. So the first 5 verses in this chapter, 1 to 5, they speak about how important it is to awaken the Kundalini. I'll speak about the Kundalini also in the context of Hatha Yoga. Why we need not worry too much about Kundalini as the practitioners of yoga. So that I will explain or kind of present my views. So the first 5 verse indicates the importance of Kundalini, awakening the Kundalini, and then the rest of the verses, 125 verses, are devoted only to the practice of the 10 mudras, the list, the details, the benefits. So all that is discussed in the third chapter. Now, about the awakening of Kundalini, so it is mentioned in the first 2 verses that all practices of yoga are based on Kundalini, and all knots and chakras are pierced by awakening the Kundalini. So yatha adharaha hinayakaha. There is our belief, our traditional belief that sashaila vanadhatrinam yathadharaha ahinayakaha. Like the earth with all the mountains and forests and trees are supported by Ahinayaka, Adishesha, on his hood. Similarly, all the practices of yoga rest on another serpent. What is that? Kundalini. So hence it is very fundamental, very foundational to understand about this Kundalini. All the chakras, all the knots, Brahma Granthi, Vishnu Granthi, Rudra Granthi, all these are pierced once the Kundalini awakens, and longevity, stillness of mind, all these are achieved by the awakening of Kundalini. All these are mentioned in this initial third verse, and then the synonyms of Kundalini is also mentioned in the 5th verse, like Sushumna, Shunya Padavi, Brahmarandram, Mahapathaha, Shmashanam, Shambhavi Mudra, Madhyamarga. No. So these are the synonyms for the Sushumna Nadi. It's not the synonym for Kundalini, it is the synonyms for the Sushumna Nadi. And what is the connection between the Sushumna and the Kundalini, which is very important. This is a typo, or rather wrong typing here. Synonyms for Sushumna is what is given in verse 4. Sushumna, Shunya Padavi, Brahmarandram, Mahapathaha, Shmashanam, Shambhavi, Madhyamargaha. All these are the synonyms for the Sushumna Nadi. So at the outset, I would want to clarify what is the connection between Sushumna, Kundalini, and what is its position in the practice of Hatha Yoga. Before that, the 5th verse says, before going into that, I would like to clarify that verse 5 mentions that all the mudras, all the 10 mudras will be elaborated in the subsequent verses are there. The mudras are to be practiced. Tasmat sarva prayatnena prabodhayitum ishwarim brahmadvara mukhe suptam mudra abhyasam samacharet. So the cause and effect connection between the practice of mudra and awakening of Kundalini is mentioned. So the very practice of mudra is for the awakening of Kundalini. Now, when we come to the discussion on awakening of Kundalini, why at all should Kundalini be awakened? We see that Kundalini is the one that lies in the path of Sushumna. So, and that stops, as we have already seen, that the objective, the ultimate goal of Hatha Yoga is to make the prana flow into the Sushumna Nadi. What is the mighty barrier that lies? Kundalini. So Kundalini is a barrier. So Kundalini is an obstacle. So it has to be seen that way. There are certain notions. Of course, in other Tantra traditions, etc., there are descriptions on how Kundalini is a Mahashakti, and then the awakening, the arousal of Kundalini, raising of the Kundalini to various levels will grant various benefits, etc. are there. But going by Hatha Yoga Pradipika, nothing of that sort is given in the text. So no importance to Kundalini is given in Hatha Yoga Pradipika other than dispatching it off. It's just an obstacle which has to be removed by the tenfold practice of the mudras. That's all. So you can have it very clearly from Hatha Yoga Pradipika that no much of significance to Kundalini, no importance needs to be attached to the Kundalini other than seeing that with the bandhas, with the mudras that are practiced, the Kundalini is removed from its blocking position in the Sushumna Nadi. We find just it's very difficult. I have tried to read it repeatedly and see only a trace of hint in the commentary where it says the Kundalini is awakened by the mudras and then it just enters into the Sushumna Nadi and there it goes. Where it goes, no hint on that, which means the least interest that is shown in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika text on awakening of the Kundalini, where it goes, it's not our business. For Hatha Yoga for Hatha Yogis, for the practitioners of yoga, it's not our business to think about Kundalini and various other Shaktis which are connected to it. Our Shakti is Prana Shakti. So Prana is the ultimate Shakti which we need to work with. So hence no need to further think about Kundalini. So when we think about, when there is mention about awakening of Kundalini here, all that is we are concerned is how we can remove this obstacle called Kundalini from the Brahmadwara Mukha. Brahmadwara is the Sushumna. Mukha, the mouth of Brahmadwara, in that this Kundalini is asleep. So it has to be removed. So only that much of a role for Kundalini is mentioned, and this is very beneficial in the sense no mysterious things to deal with, no unseen things to deal with. Everything is tangible, and we can work with. If one is not even worried about Kundalini, no problem. The idea is making the prana flow into Sushumna. That's what we are concerned. So any block, like any other impurities, Kundalini is one such impurity. Even Acharya Krishnacharya would say that it is the manifest form of all our psychic impurities. That's all. So that is how Kundalini has to be seen. And even in texts like prior texts to Hatha Yoga Pradipika, like Yoga Yajnavalkya Samhita, no importance to Kundalini is given other than removing it away from the path of the Sushumna. So as yogis, it is not good to venture into the details of Kundalini if we want to stay on track towards our higher spiritual goals. It is for the Tantra Shastrajñas. It is for those who are interested in the tantric practices. I don't say that it is not a valid path. It is also in our Sanatana Dharma. But we are all here in the context of yoga. So it would rather serve as a distraction and not a kind of a help in the progress of yoga when we worry too much about where this Kundalini awakens, where it goes, etc. So Hatha Yoga Pradipika for you gives only this much of importance to Kundalini. Then we come to the 10 mudras which are seen as the cause for awakening the Kundalini. The list of mudras is given in verse 10. We see Mahamudra, Mahabandhaha, Mahavedhascha Khechari, Udyanam Mulabandhascha, Bandho Jalandharabhitaha, Karani Viparitakya Vajroli Shakti Chalanam, Etaha Dashamudraha. So these are the 10 mudras that we see. The Mahamudra, Mahabandha, Mahavedha. The first three are considered as one unit, or they three are practiced together. And then Khechari is one practice, and a very powerful practice which has been repeated. in the third chapter it has been mentioned and elaborated. Verses 32 to 54 elaborates about Khechari. Maybe you are aware of the practice where the tongue is disengaged and it is made to turn inwards and get in touch with the Chandra that is therein. There are certain views on that also. I will highlight. You can note the color difference I have given certain mudras here. And then the Udyana Bandha, Mula Bandha and Jalandhara Bandha are the three bandhas again. So Mahamudra, Mahabandha, Mahaveda, these three are considered again the three considered as one unit in the practice. And then Madhya there is Khechari. Then we have Udyana, Mula Bandha and Jalandhara Bandha, three bandhas there. And then there is this Viparita Karani and the final two, Vajroli and Shakti Chalana. In the Krishnamacharya tradition where I have learnt and practiced, we are taught only to focus on 5 of these mudras. So that is Viparita Karani, Jalandhara Bandha, Viparita Karani, the 3 bandhas and Mahamudra. That's all. So 3 bandhas, Mahamudra and Viparita Karani. These are the 5 that we need to look into from the point of health and well-being. So other mudras are there, Khechari, Mahabandha, Mahaveda, Shakti Chalana, Vajroli, all these are there. Undeniable that they are part of the Hatha Yoga tradition. But you can see that, of course, there were practices. You have to see the Hatha Yoga when we observe the verses that are there for sannyasis or for monks who have renounced everything and are entirely focused on the practice of Hatha Yoga only. They construct a yoga matha away from the crowd and they go and dedicate their entire life for that. It is for them that all these 10 mudras. For grihasthas who are very much part of all these the worldly transactions and day-to-day life, it is enough if we focus on the 5 practices. This is the view of Sri Krishnamacharya, who stayed within the society and catered mostly to the grihastha population. So in that sense, he has observed all the pros and cons of the other mudras and has prescribed the practice of only 5, which help. For example, Mahamudra is very beneficial. Again, just like Bhastrika, which has implications on all the 3, Vata, Pitta and Kapha, this Mahamudra is simply glorified for its wonderful benefits, manifold benefits that are given for Mahamudra. Hence, for all the digestive and such other problems associated with the middle part of our body, the Mahamudra is a very beneficial practice. And then these 3 bandhas, of course, Udyana Bandha, Mula Bandha and Jalandhara Bandha, they facilitate the better practice of pranayama. So the bandhas, with the bandhas, when pranayama is done, the outcome that is dirgha sukshmatva can be attained properly. Hence it is important. And of course, Viparita Karani also has a lot of benefits which can be practiced by the grihasthas without much suffering or trouble. So all these 5 are given, and Krishnamacharya comes down very heavily on practices like Vajroli, etc., which he terms them as Vamachara. And it's not at all needed to be focused upon or studied. I know there will be multiple opinions on the mudras which are not considered, but there is one tradition, one system which says that these need not be focused upon in the current context when everyone is looking for the health and well-being dimension of yoga. And gradually, if later one wants to intensify one's focus and effort, of course, one can consider. But at the initial stage, at the current the atmosphere and ambience with which, or kind of the mindset with which yoga is approached, these can be set aside. That's his very clear view. And this is about the 10 mudras. Interestingly, I'll just want to mention one idea here. That what is the translation for mudra? This is not in the slide. What is the translation for mudra? normally. So what is the translation that you see? So you just like asanas are translated as postures, mudra, gestures, psychic attitudes. Have you heard of this translation, seal? So seal is one of the ridiculous translations that one can give, but in most Western publications, you see mudra being translated as seal. It is not seal or walrus. It is something else. What is the vyutpatti? What is the etymology of the term mudra? In the context of Mahamudra, the commentator Jyotsna, in the Jyotsna commentary, we can see that mudrayati shamayati iti mudra. So mudrayati shamayati iti mudra. Mudrayati means shamayati, means pacifies. So mudra, the practice of mudra, it pacifies. The appropriate translation is pacifier. So that which pacifies. And then gradually the movement of prana into sushumna. So that is the pallavi, has to be sung again and again in the context of Hatha Yoga, movement of prana into sushumna. So then has to be seen as the pacifier, that which pacifies the vata pitta kapha related vitiations and facilitates, promotes good health, etc. So that's why too much of a dependence on English translation may lead to certain ridiculous usages of the terms as such. Many asanas are also translated that way. Mudra is one classical example in that regard. So as I had mentioned already, among these 10 mudras, only 50% are needed in the current context when we see in the context of the practice of the current health and well-being perspective. And even the Shakti Chalana Mudra, which is given towards the end, again the text itself mentions that Etad Rahasya Gurumukhad Avagantavyam. It's not to be read from any books, not to be seen from any YouTube video and practiced. One has to consult or surrender oneself to a guru and learn it from him. Means, as we see that seriously one should do the practice of such mudra like Shakti Chalana, or it may lead to various unseen troubles from which one cannot come out. So hence, Prakalanadhi Pankasya Durad Asparshanam Varam. This is a proverb in Sanskrita. Rather than washing away the what is that? The mud and this thing, dirt from our body, not going into that area itself will be very safe. So in that sense, when Acharyas like Krishnamacharya he was a Purnacharya. He lived for 100 years. So of his life experience, when he says all these things, we should give a serious thought in not venturing into these areas. So this is about the mudras, and also those other mudras which are not considered by Krishnamacharya, like the Mahavedha, the Mahabandha, the Vajroli, and also Shakti Chalana. The siddhis are promised for them. Animadayaha. Again, siddhis are distractions. So from various perspectives, from health hazard to distraction in the form of siddhis, all these are possible. Hence, it is not worth considering because there is nothing wrong. So initially, one can say that in the very opening of my talk, in the first session, I said, Agama is the first stepping stone. Now you say you should leave out 5 practices which are mentioned in this. Is that not a contradiction? But in our tradition, Agama is not always stagnant. So there is always time to time revision, and according to Desha and Kala, we have to appropriately revise it. And who should revise it? Not me. Acharyas like Krishnamacharya, who have had the life experience. So they have given. So such acharyas, when they guide us, give us the input, then it is worth considering to revise these practices. Though it has been stated in certain agamas that these are the 10 mudras to be practiced. So our tradition, that is the beauty of our Sanatana Dharma. We never ever hesitate to revise Kala Bahya, whatever is not very beneficial for current time. It is worth revising it. So in that sense, we have to consider other 5 mudras. So in this very wide chapter, we see that the 3 bandhas again are elaborated to a very great extent, the Jalandhara, Mula Bandha and Udyana Bandha. And then it is also indicated that mindfulness is to be practiced. Means again, mindfulness is not some practice that has come from some other, or it is not a recent kind of idea or innovation in the context of pranayama, dhyana or yoga practices. Marutasya vidhim sarvam manoyuktam samacharet. This is a very critical input when we all the prescriptions connected to Maruta, that is the Vayu or Prana. Marutasya vidhi, whichever practices are advised with regard to the prana, inhalation, exhalation or hold, it has to be done manoyuktam. So mind should be there. So should be up. That's again the trouble or problem when we have the urge, unnecessary urge to translate everything to English. When we say pranayama, breathing practices, then our mind with only the breath level. Whereas when we go into the commentary, into the tree, that marutasya sarvam mano, when we take the terminology, then we are reminded it is not mere breathing practice, something more is here. What is more? The mind. So mindfully one has to inhale, exhale, hold, whatever is the procedure. So that's verse 127, which has to be underlined. Even if it is memorized, it's very good. So that's how when we say that the previous limbs of practice of yoga lead us gradually into the next limb, how is that? So the aspects or components of the previous limbs are to be incorporated. So for example, if I aspire to go into pratyahara and dhyana, then right in the pranayama practice, the role of the mind has to be brought. Even in asana, even in pranayama, the mind, so in asana, breathing has to be incorporated so that later pranayama is done better. And in pranayama, the mind has to be applied, or it has to be done mindfully, so that later practices like pratyahara, dharana, dhyana is facilitated. So in this way, all these are not compartmental. One flows into the other. So if it is done in such manner, then it will be complete, systematic, gradual progression. Or else, first chapter asana, then finish. Just like all that we learn in the previous class, we forget for the next class. That is in our schooling. So it is not that way. One practice, one limb has to flow into the other, so that the progress is gradual and natural. So, and all that is stated on this mudra. And finally, the last hint that is given in this mudra chapter is that tasya vakya paro bhutva mudrabhyase samahitaha upadesham hi mudranam jyodatte sampradayikam sayeva Shri Guru Swami sakshad Ishvara evava. So the idea is, though all these have been elaborated by me in this book, Atmarama says that though all these have been elaborated, the methods, techniques, systems have been elaborated, but one has to go to the Guru. Sampradayika means the one who has come in the Sampradaya. What is Sampradaya? Where there is an unbroken succession, where there have been practitioners who have been able to achieve the higher goals that have been prescribed in the Shastra. So that is the lineage, that is the value of following a lineage. Of course, there is an advantage in bringing in yogic education in the current academic scenario, where we see masters, the bachelor's degrees, there are diplomas, degrees, undergraduate degrees, postgraduate degrees, doctoral studies, all those are progressing. It's well and good. Some touch of yoga in the academic scenario in the modern context is there, but as we see from the commentaries, from the text, there is a repeated emphasis on going. So it is a point to discuss or think or analyze by academicians and educationalists as to how to maintain the sanctity, purity, and the lack of distortion that we see in the traditional stronghold, the knowledge that is passed down through the traditions of various yoga. So how can it be in an undiluted manner, can be brought into the current day academic scenario also? So already we can observe that samsarga deva jayante, samsarga is given a lot of the company satsanga or dussanga, it makes or mars thing. So whether yoga is benefiting by entering into the mainstream academia, or yoga is losing out by entering into a mainstream academic setup of thing, is a moot point. Is what to be reflected and thought over as to maintain the vitality and the originality of inputs of yoga. What needs to be done? The thinkers and the educationalists in the field of yoga should guide us by looking into the traditional dimension, the importance to sampradaya that is given in the practice of yoga, because it is the knowledge that is accumulated in sampradaya that has the healing capability. So more than merely looking it as a physiological movement, etc., the shraddha dimension, repeatedly we see emphasis on the shraddha aspect of it, where how do we gain that shraddha, be it the shraddha virya smriti samadhi prajna purvaka itaresham in yoga sudha, the impact and the effect of the practice that we receive is multiplied manifold. I'm not sure whether we have the same kind of shraddha on our associate professors, assistant professors, or professors, but one can, of course, benchmark of sampradaya that is established in the tradition. Maybe the current educational scenario, which has adopted the yoga also, can help raise the professors of various levels to the level of guru. So with this observation, I end this session. We will continue and conclude in the next session, and we can take up questions also in the final session.